The era of the Jacksonian Democrats, Presidents John Quincy Adams through Martin Van Buren, a review from the American Pageant, Chapter 13. The first president discussed in this chapter is John Quincy Adams, who came to power through something we call the corrupt bargain. There were 4 candidates for president in 1824, and no candidate got a majority of the votes. John Quincy Adams was the president that was elected by the House of Representatives, and some people believe that Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, who was also a presidential candidate, ended up getting John Quincy Adams enough votes to be elected because Henry Clay really did not want Andrew Jackson to win the election. John Quincy Adams, therefore, really only got 1/3 of the popular vote to be president, and he was not very well liked by the people. He was also somewhat impractical in the sense that he really wanted to do things that were not what the common people wanted. This included a national observatory and also a university that he wanted to build, but he did very little else and was very hands-off during his office. And he did give Henry Clay the office of Secretary of State, which led a lot of people to believe there was some kind of corrupt bargain between the two, because the Secretary of State position at that time was a stepping stone to the presidency. After John Quincy Adams was elected in 1824, Andrew Jackson started campaigning immediately to be the next president of the United States. And even though there was some mudslinging in his campaign, he did become the first common man president who was not from Virginia. He was from the state of Tennessee, born in the Carolinas. Andrew Jackson had become famous for his military successes, you might remember, in the War of 1812. At the Battle of New Orleans, and also in gaining Florida when he went down there and led a mission to capture some runaway slaves. He helped the United States secure that territory in Florida from Spain with the Adams-Onis Treaty. And also he had won a battle at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, in which he defeated some Native Americans and moved them off some lands there. So these are the things that he had become famous for. And President Andrew Jackson would be known as the first common man president, and he would try to do things for common people that they really wanted. And sometimes he didn't really follow the Constitution when he did this, and sometimes he just out and out disobeyed the courts. But for the time when he was president, he really believed that he was giving the common people what they wanted. He took an opportunity to get back at Henry Clay for the corrupt bargain with something called the Maysville Road Veto. In this, he kept the federal government from paying for a road in Kentucky, which was Henry Clay's home state. One of the first issues that Andrew Jackson dealt with was the issue of the tariff. And you might remember the tariff was passed just after the War of 1812. It was intended to make imports or British goods more expensive than American goods so that people would buy the American good. The tariff, though, had continued to be raised over time and had gotten so high that the 1828 tariff was called the Tariff of Abominations, and it was also called the Black Tariff. This was a very high tariff, between over 25%, and it was intended to protect wool manufacturers in the U.S. from competition with British wool manufacturers. However, it was really hard on the South because the South traded many goods with Britain. They traded and sold their cotton, and they also bought a lot of goods from Britain because they did not have factories in the South, and they had to transport goods from the North, and this also added to the cost of those goods. It made goods from the North even more expensive. So the South was hit with higher prices, whether they got their goods from the North or whether they paid for the higher good from Britain that had the tariff on it. South Carolina took the lead in protesting this tariff. And John C. Calhoun, who was vice president at the time, anonymously wrote a document called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. And in it, he said that states have the right to make federal laws illegal if those federal laws are harmful. And he based his argument on Thomas Jefferson's and James Madison's Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. And it was also saying that states have rights and they should be able to make federal laws illegal. The South Carolina legislature then went forward and held a convention in which they decided to make the tariff illegal. In the South Carolina Ordinance of Nullification, they declared they would not enforce the tariff, and they even threatened to secede from the Union. Andrew Jackson did not take too kindly to that, and he did send the military to South Carolina as a show of force to keep them from seceding. In the meantime, Henry Clay, who was known as the Great Compromiser in Congress, did manage to get a compromise tariff passed through Congress, which promised to reduce tariffs slowly over 10 years and de-escalate the conflict with South Carolina. But along with this compromise tariff, there was a force bill passed stating that Congress could give the president, and did give the president, the right to use the military to collect those tariffs. So at this time, we have lots of issues coming up between the differences of North and South, and one of those issues is the tariff. Jackson also started something called the spoils system. In this, he hired political supporters into government jobs regardless of experience and education. Most of the time, this did not cause an issue. However, Jackson did hire one person, at least one person, into a government position in the New York's Custom House, who did not do a good job with managing the money. Samuel Swartout left his accounts in the Customs House $1 million short, and he was a Jackson appointee. But the important thing about the spoils system is that it would be used by presidents after Jackson to reward political supporters, and some presidents would make good decisions in appointing people who were qualified, and others would not make good decisions and would suffer the same embarrassment that President Jackson did when Samuel Swartout's accounts were left short. Jackson also wanted to free up lands for the growing farming population. And so he got involved with the issue in Georgia between the Cherokee Indians and the state. Some cases that had occurred in Georgia, called Worcester versus Georgia, were over the fact whether the Cherokee could stay on their lands and whether their constitution that they had written would be recognized, and whether their tribal council constituted a government that should be recognized by the United States. In this case, Worcester versus Georgia, Georgia ruled against the Cherokee and said they would not recognize the Cherokee as a sovereign nation, and that they did not recognize the tribal council as a ruling body. The Cherokee continued to fight this case, and they moved all the way up to the Supreme Court. In the case Cherokee Nation versus U.S., the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Cherokee, saying their tribal council should be recognized and that they should be recognized as a nation. However, President Jackson decided to ignore this decision and took the military and moved the Native Americans at gunpoint. He got the Congress to pass the Indian Removal Act of 1830, and this moved the 5 civilized tribes west to clear new lands for settlement, and those Native Americans would be moved west to the Mississippi River and told that they would live there as long as the sun would set, when in reality it was only about 15 years before the U.S. government sought to move them again. Meanwhile, in the Trail of Tears, the Native Americans called the Indian Removal Act the Trail of Tears. It resulted in the death of over 4,000 Indians on their forced journey to the west. About 100,000 Indians from the 5 civilized tribes were moved to this western land. Because of some of the decisions that Andrew Jackson made, there was a first third party to spring up that was basically a anti-Jackson Party. And the name of this party was the Anti-Masonic Party. And they were mostly against the rich, secretive Masons group. However, they were also speaking out against the policies of Andrew Jackson as far as the tariff, the bank, and some of his political appointments. Martin Van Buren would succeed Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Jackson would manipulate the convention, the nominating convention, until Martin Van Buren was nominated by the Democrats for president. And Jackson wanted Martin Van Buren in office to continue to get rid of the National Bank after Jackson had already started to take away its deposits. Jackson had hired and fired a Secretary of the Treasury again and again in order to remove those deposits from the bank and effectively put it out of business. He had also vetoed the charter for the bank that was presented by Henry Clay. The Independent Treasury Act occurred during the presidency of Martin Van Buren, and this act said that the National Bank, because of its death, the U.S. vault of American money would be placed in various cities throughout the United States. And once again, this was an attempt to take care of U.S. deposits, to have a place to put them in the absence of a national bank, which had been put out of business by Andrew Jackson. The next president would be William Henry Harrison, and he would be elected basically as a war hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe against Tecumseh and his brother the Prophet. He would become president in 1836 and was seen as another common man president and a war hero. A couple of events during his presidency, and we have a Supreme Court case, Charles River Bridge versus Warren Bridge, in which the Supreme Court ruled that private companies have to act for public benefit in the case of toll bridges versus a public bridge. This case is important because it set a precedent for government action or intervention to protect the public against a company's actions that may be detrimental to the public. And we'll see a lot more of this during the Progressive era.